22 disturbing clips, 7 levels. This iceberg is full of some of the most disturbing footage ever caught on camera. We'll start with some of the more expected disturbing footage, but the deeper we get, the more shocking and horrific things will become. Let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Level 1. Elephant Road Rage. Kevlabalk was riding his scooter down a highway in Sri Lanka when he spotted an enormous elephant stood in the middle of the road blocking his path. To be more specific, an 11,000-pound behemoth that could easily crush a car if it wanted to. Obviously, Kev did what any of us would do. He stopped his scooter and tried to work out what the hell to do next. Maybe this was a common thing in this country, but then something unusual happened. Something triggered the elephant to become hyper-aggressive, charging toward Kev and forcing him into a horrible split-second decision: turn the scooter around or abandon it completely. Without thinking, Kev abandons his scooter and flees, believing that turning the scooter would take precious seconds he didn't have. But he kept his GoPro on his helmet, allowing us to see this insanely terrifying footage. There's a moment in the video where the shadow of the elephant growing larger and larger, and you realize just how tiny and insignificant we humans really are. After all, these elephants can reach speeds of 25 miles per hour when they're angry, and this one seemed intent on making Kev understand that he was not welcome. Kev takes a dive at the end of the video, and it's easy to think that he was trampled or even killed, but that's not the case at all. Actually, he was saved by the honking of cars driving down the road. Apparently, the sudden cacophony of car horns startled the elephant enough to make it reconsider and flee the scene. Studies have shown that elephants are extremely sensitive to unexpected sounds, so sharp mechanical sounds like car horns can disrupt their focus. Level 2. Brutal robbery in broad daylight. This security camera footage from Polokwane, South Africa contains one of the most shocking robberies you're ever going to see. This man with the red pants is handing over some goods for safekeeping, but before the items are taken, he's attacked. See that guy on the left? He's just given a subtle signal to his fellow criminals. Within seconds, the guy is held in a chokehold and frantically robbed by a gang of 6 people. They calmly check every one of his pockets, taking his phone, money, and any other valuables he may have. Once his goods are taken, they push him away and walk into the distance. Walk. Look how casual they are about their brazen daylight robbery. This is a very normal thing for these guys. In fact, it's a common thing in Polokwane's central business district. This gang of robbers uses masks and well-organized, speedy muggings to target their victims and then wander off into the crowd, never to be identified again. Their approach has been repeated in numerous other incidents across the city. None of these criminals have ever been caught or sent to prison. But the one thing that you can catch is more disturbing icebergs like this one, if you hit that subscribe button. For now, on to the next level. Level 3. 2 skydivers nearly hit mid-air by a plane. Forrest Pullman, a skydiving instructor, thought he was going to die. He was strapped to his tandem passenger, having just leaped from their plane above Thailand on October 19, 2014, when the aircraft did something that shouldn't happen. The pilot dove the airplane 180 degrees right at them just seconds after exit. Realizing what was happening, Forrest pulled the drogue chute, that small stabilizing parachute that deploys first to slow their fall, but it got clipped by the plane's wing. You can see it happening in the video Forrest's GoPro captured. The drogue and bridle stretched over the wing, their bodies missing the propeller by inches at most. They were truly inches away from an unthinkably brutal death. But the impact with the wing sent them into a violent tailspin, their bodies whipping around in the sky as the damaged drogue chute failed to provide the stability it was designed for. The passenger, completely unaware of how close they'd come to being shredded by the propeller, experienced what she thought was just part of the thrill. But Forrest fought to regain control, working the tandem rig until he could stabilize their descent. The plane had executed a dangerous maneuver that was once more common in skydiving operations. Some pilots would perform these diving passes after dropping skydivers, possibly to show off or add excitement to the experience. But this was an insanely risky and highly dangerous one. The aircraft came so close that the video shows the propeller literally spinning just feet away from where their bodies were positioned. When they finally landed, the tourist gave a thumbs up and they exchanged high fives. She had experienced what she thought was an exciting tandem jump. Only Forrest knew they had survived something that should have killed them both. Well, the pilot knew too, when he inevitably got fired. Attempted assassination of Ahmed Dogan at Bulgarian Party Congress. January 19th, 2013, at the National Palace of Culture in Sofia, Bulgaria, Ahmed Dogan, the leader of a minority party in Turkey, is mid-speech at the Movement for Rights and Freedoms Congress when a man in a black leather jacket storms the stage, raises a pistol against Ahmed's face, and clicks. Nothing comes out. Or so it seems. But before he can try again, security rushes the stage to take him down, all the while on camera for the entire world to see. Oh, and of course, there was also a little extra violence added to the mix, as all of those security people just started beating the ever-loving snot out of the attacker. Solidarity, I guess. The suspect was 25-year-old Oktay Enememedov, a Bulgarian-born ethnic Turk with past criminal convictions. When he was questioned afterwards, he said that the weapon was a gas pistol and that it was meant to prove that Ahmed Dogan was not untouchable, not to end his life. But even if the gun didn't have bullets in it, it was still a weapon that could easily blind or maim someone at that range. Ahmed was so shaken by the attack that he resigned from his position as party leader just hours later. Oktay was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. Level 4. Matteo Mariotti Shark Attack. When Matteo Mariotti stepped into the water at 1770 Beach in Queensland on December 8, 2023, he was already in a bad place. He was 20 years old, studying marine biology in Australia and desperately searching for solace after receiving the devastating news that his grandfather Giovanni had died. But after taking a few steps into the shallow, he felt a terrible pain in his foot. A shark had just clamped its jaws down around his leg, desperately trying to drag him toward deeper water. Matteo managed to grab the shark's head with his hands, forcing its mouth open to free his trapped leg. He later told Italian newspaper Gazzetta di Parma that he could immediately sense the damage was catastrophic, saying, "From the knee down, I could tell there was nothing left." The shark finally released him, likely because his snorkel fin had become lodged in its mouth, not because of any kind of generosity. Fearing the shark would return to finish what it started, Matteo pulled out his GoPro camera to record what he believed would be his final moments. The footage shows him frantically swimming back to shore while screaming for help, his torn wetsuit and the crimson water around him creating a scene of pure terror. His panicked voice can be heard crying, "I beg you to help me," as he struggles toward his friend on the beach. His friend, Tommaso Agosti, a diving instructor, rushed into the water to drag him onto the rocks, where the full extent of the damage became visible. Matteo had lost significant amounts of blood, and his right leg was so severely damaged that amputation below the knee became inevitable. This footage was literally Matteo's way of saying goodbye to his family and friends. He never thought he would have a hope of surviving an attack like this. He later returned to Italy for prosthetic treatment at the Rizzoli Orthopedic Institute, where doctors worked to help him adapt to his new reality. Despite the trauma, he credited his deceased grandfather with protecting him, saying, "I no longer have a leg, but I'm alive. My grandfather protected me." Tiger drags woman at wildlife park. This grainy security footage from Beijing's Badaling Wildlife World on July 23, 2016 is just 30 seconds long, but it's terrifying. A white sedan travels through the Siberian tiger enclosure carrying a family of 4. Bajao, a 32-year-old woman feeling dizzy from car sickness, makes a fatal decision that turns a peaceful day out into a horror story. The footage shows Zhao stepping out of the passenger side of the car, walking around the front of the vehicle and standing beside the driver's door, apparently talking to her husband. Whatever her reasons for doing it, she doesn't seem particularly concerned about the dangers, which is why it's so horrifying when the tiger emerges into the frame. The massive Siberian tiger bounds up to the vehicle and grabs Zhao, knocking her to the ground before dragging her away from the road. The attack happens so quickly that she has no time to react. The husband jumps out immediately, chasing after his wife and the tiger. But the horror is far from over. Zhao's 57-year-old mother, Zhou, sitting in the back seat with her grandson, sees her daughter being dragged away. Without hesitation, she exits the vehicle and runs towards the commotion. This act of maternal instinct seals her fate. A second tiger, attracted by the chaos, attacks the older woman off camera. Unlike her daughter, Zhou doesn't survive the encounter. The surveillance footage shows park staff arriving in a green SUV almost immediately, but they're powerless to stop what's unfolding. The rescue vehicle stays at a safe distance while the family members desperately try to fight off the tigers with their bare hands. The husband and mother have no weapons, so they can only hit the massive predators with their fists in a futile attempt to save Zhao. Zhao survived, but barely. She was rushed to the hospital with severe injuries to multiple parts of her body, including nerve damage and facial scarring. Her face was reportedly ripped off, according to some accounts. But the psychological trauma was so much worse. She had to watch her mother die while trying to save her. Skydiving fail on camera. David Winokur never wanted to skydive in the first place. He was a 49-year-old Manhattan real estate executive at Skydive the Ranch in Gardner, New York, for a friend's 50th birthday party. He was the cautious type, the kind of man who weighs risks carefully, but on June 15, 2012, his wife convinced him to take the jump. David was strapped to 25-year-old Alexander Chulsky, a Brooklyn instructor with hundreds of jumps under his belt. When they jumped, everything was just fine, until the parachute failed to deploy. The witnesses on the ground who happened to be filming the whole thing watched as the pair entered a continuous free fall, careening toward the earth below. They crashed into an apple orchard between Gardner and Modena, and despite desperate attempts to revive both men, it was too late. His funeral was held on Father's Day, which was also his father's 83rd birthday. He would never have agreed to do the skydive on any other day, and his wife would later admit at his funeral that maybe this time he should have said no. But he never said no to her, and that devotion cost him everything. Rapper Foolio shooting. On June 23, 2024, Jacksonville rapper Julio Foolio had just celebrated his 26th birthday in Tampa, Florida. He was sitting in a parking lot outside a hotel in a black sedan with 3 friends, unaware that he was about to be killed. The surveillance footage shows exactly how the whole scene unfolded. It's 4:36 a.m. when the first gunman appears on camera, and it's obvious immediately that these guys are prepared. They have been lying in wait, positioned strategically throughout the shared parking lot of the Holiday Inn in Hilton just for this moment. They have black masks on, semi-automatic rifles, and a handgun. When the group of gunmen open fire on his car, there's basically no time for the rapper or his crew to fully react. You can see the vehicle attempting to flee as the gunman opens fire at point-blank range. The sedan jumps the curb in a desperate attempt to escape, but the damage is already done. By this point, Foolio was really badly wounded. The other gunmen had positioned themselves around the parking lot, creating an inescapable trap, a kind of coordinated ambush designed to ensure Foolio couldn't survive. The investigation later revealed that these attackers had been tracking Foolio's movements throughout the night, following him from location to location. Foolio himself was pronounced dead at the scene. These gunmen had been waiting around since 3 a.m. in the darkness for over an hour before Foolio's arrival. They knew exactly where he would be, when he would arrive, and how to position themselves for maximum effectiveness. There was absolutely nothing that he could have done. All of this was the culmination of a gang feud that had been building for years. The ATK and 1200 gangs had worked together to target Fulio, a member of the rival 6 Block gang. The surveillance footage became crucial evidence in eventually identifying and arresting the suspects. But for those who watched it, the video represents the end of a man who would broadcast his location on social media, right to the very enemies who wanted him gone. Shooting at Industry Street. In this security footage, a Honda CR-V pulls up to the 1800 block of Industry Street at exactly 5:15 p.m. The vehicle parks outside a residence where people are relaxing on the front porch enjoying what remains of the day. But then, 2 individuals emerge from the black Honda, stepping out of the front and rear passenger doors in a coordinated motion. They raise their weapons and fire multiple rounds at the people sitting on the porch, ruining their day entirely. In fact, those 2 people, a 36-year-old woman and a 76-year-old woman, both suffer injuries, though the wounds are not life-threatening. But the older woman's age suggests that she most likely grew up on this street, so she saw it develop over decades, probably never imagining such violence would reach her doorstep. But now the shooters get back in their car and flee Industry Street altogether, leaving their victims bleeding on the porch. Emergency medical services arrived later to transport both women to a local hospital. Unfortunately, both of the women survived their injuries, but the porch was obviously destroyed pretty brutally. However, here's what's so strange about this. The methodical nature of the attack suggests planning. These shooters knew exactly where to go, how to position themselves, and which escape route to take. They specifically targeted these women, but why? The fact that they used both front and rear passenger doors indicated this was coordinated and rehearsed, but the logic behind it makes no sense. The victims' ages span 2 generations, so it was clearly some attempt to send a message, but what is that message? To this day, nobody knows. It's just a random, horrible shooting that almost killed 2 innocent women. Level 5. Escalator accident in Rome. On October 23, 2018, in Rome's Repubblica metro station, a typical descent on the escalator became a nightmare when the steps suddenly accelerated to dangerous speeds, hurling Russian football fans toward the bottom at an insanely fast pace. This video footage shows the exact moment the escalator lost control, with about 80 people packed shoulder to shoulder being thrown down at breakneck speeds. All of those bodies piled on top of each other at the bottom, creating a human crush that witnesses describe as apocalyptic. Those on the other escalator could see the problem unfolding, desperately trying to pull victims to safety, grabbing arms and hauling them across the divider between the 2 moving staircases. But it's when you see the aftermath photos that you really realize just how truly dangerous this situation was. The escalator steps completely crumpled into each other at the bottom, creating jagged metal plates that would have been like sharp blades against human flesh. The last dozen steps collapsed into one another, forming shards of twisted metal that trapped people between the plates. One 33-year-old man suffered a complex trauma with a disassembled and exposed fracture of the lower right limb, which is doctor speak for his foot was so badly mangled it required amputation. Fire Chief Gian Pietro Boschiano described finding people piled up at the bottom of the escalator, people one on top of the other looking for help. The twisted metal had created a nightmare scenario where victims couldn't escape, their legs caught between the collapsed steps. 7 people were in serious condition, with most suffering leg injuries from being entangled in the escalator's mangled mechanics. All of the victims were CSKA Moscow fans heading to their Champions League match against Roma. They were all in good spirits until this moment, which, understandably, put a real downer on the evening. Semi-truck dangles from bridge after dramatic crash. This split-screen view is about to show you something shocking. This is Sydney Thomas working the wheel on her Cisco semi-truck. On the other side, we can see her dash cam showing us where she's going and what she's about to hit. It's March 1st, 2024, around 12:30 p.m. on the Clark Memorial Bridge connecting Louisville to southern Indiana. And this is the exact moment that Trevor Branham's pickup truck swerves wildly to avoid a stalled electric vehicle, causing his Chevrolet C1500 to crash head-on into Sydney's semi. Suddenly, Sydney loses all control of her truck, screaming as the steering wheel stops responding. The impact broke the suspension, meaning no matter which way she turned the wheel, the truck was going wherever physics decided, which happened to be the bridge's guardrail. The semi plows through the guardrail like it's made of paper, and then comes the moment that captured millions of viewers around the world. The truck cab hanging 100 feet above the Ohio River, with Sydney still strapped inside. You can hear her panic in the audio as she realizes what's happening, the cab tilting at an impossible angle over the water. The trailer, wedged between the bridge's girders, is the only thing keeping the entire rig from plummeting into the river. For 45 minutes, Sydney dangled there thinking about her 5-year-old son and what would happen if she died. She couldn't swim, and the water looked impossibly far below. It seemed less a case of if and more about when. Louisville firefighter Bryce Carden rappelled down to Sydney's cab asking if she was a praying woman before they both started praying together for them to pull this off. He used a pocket knife from an LG&E training session to cut her seatbelt, and the rescue took nearly an hour to complete. Sydney later said she thought the trailer was still on the bridge and didn't realize how precarious her position was until she saw the footage back later. The arrest report later described Trevor's driving as showing extreme indifference to the value of human life. He was charged with 4 counts of wanton endangerment and 1 count of operating on a suspended license, though a grand jury later dismissed the felony charges in September 2024. Failed assassination attempt on Argentine vice president. This video footage starts where so much of modern politics seems to end, with a handgun pointed at a politician's face. Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner approaches her Buenos Aires home on September 1st, 2022, surrounded by supporters who had gathered for days to show solidarity during her corruption trial. The vice president smiles, waves, bends down to pick up something from the ground, and then a man's hand emerges from the crowd holding a black pistol within inches of her face. He actually pulls the trigger. You can hear the click in the video, but nothing happens. The weapon, loaded with 5 bullets, fails to fire. President Alberto Fernandez would later describe it as technical failure that saved her life, though the exact reason remains unconfirmed. Whatever it was a miracle for her. Fernando Sabag Montiel, the 35-year-old Brazilian gunman, had simply walked through the crowd like any other supporter. He'd been there for hours, blending in with the people chanting for their political hero. The Bersa .32 caliber pistol had belonged to his deceased neighbor, and investigators would later confirm his DNA was on the weapon. But he somehow managed to pull all of this off without arousing even the slightest bit of suspicion. If that bullet hadn't misfired, it would have been a horrifyingly efficient attack. The seconds that follow capture something raw about human nature. Christina recoils, her hands shooting up to protect her face, but the crowd doesn't immediately understand what's happening. There's confusion, a surge of bodies, and then recognition. Supporters and security personnel tackle Montiel within seconds. Someone punches him in the eye hard enough to cut his eyelid. Montiel had tried to fire twice. The gun contained 5 functional bullets, but he hadn't loaded it properly, a technical error that prevented the weapon from discharging. Later, when questioned, he would describe his nervousness in that moment. "Imagine how nervous I was. I pulled the trigger and the shot didn't go off." He called it like a flash when asked about his motivation, which doesn't tell you anything. That moment was captured on multiple cell phone cameras as the moment that very almost changed the course of Argentinian politics. This was a politician who had survived corruption charges, political attacks, and years of public scrutiny, suddenly facing a gun held by one of her own unsatisfied citizens. She survived through pure luck. Level 6. Kolkata Bus Live Accident. This footage captures a crowded minibus carrying 40 passengers to an engagement ceremony in Kolkata on January 30th, 2022. when the front left tire bursts with a violent sound. The bus lurches sideways, its frame twisting as it veers toward the roadside near Darina Crossing. In that split second, two passengers who were clinging to the door of the minibus find themselves thrown from their precarious positions and crushed. This is, tragically, the disturbing reality of overcrowded public transport. In Kolkata, this is something of a necessity for locals, forcing them to grip door frames and railings as the vehicle moves through the city. These passengers who couldn't find space inside positioned themselves on the outside of the bus just to get where they had to be. But on this day, physics was not on their side. The massive weight of the bus, now completely out of control, comes crashing down on top of them. The footage shows the sickening moment when the overturned vehicle pins them beneath its bulk. What makes it worse is that the trapped passengers were squashed, not killed instantly, but compressed under the weight of the bus as it settled on its side. The video captures the desperate attempts of bystanders who rush to the scene, trying to lift the heavy vehicle with their bare hands, but the bus weighs thousands of pounds, and human strength proves useless against that kind of weight. The bus driver, 27-year-old Sarfaraz Khan, later told police that both the steering wheel and brakes had failed simultaneously. There was simply nothing he could have done to avoid this horrific situation. Emergency responders eventually arrived with hydraulic equipment to lift the bus, but they were too late. 27 people were hospitalized, with the most seriously injured being those who had been hanging on the outside. The investigation revealed the minibus had been operating without valid documents for over 3 years, a detail that adds another layer of local institutional failure to the human tragedy. The overcrowding that forced passengers to hang on to the exterior was a daily reality for thousands of commuters in Kolkata who rely on inadequate public transport. This video is living proof of how dangerous and insane that is. Hot air balloon fire incident in Brazil. This footage shows a hot air balloon carrying 21 people bursting into flame high above Praia Grande, Brazil, the basket becoming a furnace. How did that happen? What happens next? All good questions, but the answers are horrible. Here's what happened. Mid-flight, a backup torch apparently sparked without warning, licking at the fabric and wicker of the balloon until flames engulfed the floor beneath the guests. The pilot yanked on the vent line, but the inferno spread so fast the envelope lifted the basket back up, shifting the weight and singeing the ropes under tension. Our pilot shouted for everyone to jump once they're low enough, but some of them jump long before it's safe to do so. And the camera captures the whole thing as it unfolds. The onlookers in the video can be heard sobbing as one person after another jumps from the balloon with absolutely no chance of survival. But those who don't jump are also guaranteed to die as the balloon bursts, bringing the burning wicker basket back down to Earth. Actually, none of them were guaranteed to die. When the balloon crashed back down to Earth, it was charred, but 13 survivors were rushed to the hospital. 8 of them had died. It was an unthinkable disaster, one that nobody could possibly have expected to see. Adam Johnson, cut in the throat by skate blade. It was a truly unfortunate moment. Adam Johnson was skating with the puck through Sheffield's defensive zone only to collide with Matt Petgrave in what appeared to be a typical hockey play. But Petgrave's left skate lifted as he fell, and the blade struck Johnson directly in the neck, slashing it open. Johnson tried to skate away from the collision, blood already covering his white jersey. He managed only a few strides before collapsing on the ice, clearly struggling to breathe. His girlfriend, Ryan Wolf, was watching from the stands and immediately ran onto the ice toward her boyfriend of 3 years. The 8,000 fans at Sheffield's Utilita Arena witnessed something that would be described as the stuff of nightmares, while players from both teams formed a protective circle around Johnson. Yorkshire Ambulance Services dispatched 2 ambulances and a critical care paramedic to the arena at around 8:20 p.m., performing CPR on the ice. The game announcer made the call for fans to evacuate the building, citing a major medical emergency. Johnson was stretchered off the ice and rushed to Sheffield's Northern General Hospital. The game was over. At the hospital, Johnson was later identified by his fiancée, Ryan Wolf, dead from a fatal neck injury. One doctor noted that an injury like this can cause someone to bleed out within 15 seconds. Johnson's attempt to skate away after the collision became one of the most haunting details of the footage, because it showed how much he wanted to go on. What made the incident particularly shocking was how normal everything appeared in the moments before the collision. Johnson was simply carrying the puck forward when Petgrave approached him. The collision itself looked like countless others that happen in hockey games, but then Petgrave's skate kicked up, and in an instant, Johnson's life was over before we even knew it. The arena evacuation created its own chaos. Social media immediately erupted with footage of the incident, despite calls from officials to stop sharing the video. The footage became a subject of intense debate, with some viewing it as evidence of an intentional act of inter-team sabotage, while others saw it as a tragic accident. Johnson's family later discovered that he had purchased an engagement ring and was planning to propose to Wolf during their time in England. The ring sat hidden in their shared apartment as Johnson lay dying in the hospital, a cruel twist of fate. Level 7. Haiti earthquake caught on camera. The ground stopped shaking after 35 seconds, but Port-au-Prince, a city of 2 million people, had become a graveyard in that time. The magnitude 7.0 earthquake that struck Haiti on January 12, 2010 at 4:53 p.m. local time hit just 25 kilometers from the capital. But what made this earthquake particularly devastating was its shallow depth of only 13 kilometers below the surface, meaning the seismic waves reached populated areas with maximum intensity. The death toll estimates range from 160 to 316,000 people killed. More people died in those 35 seconds than in the entirety of the Vietnam War. The video footage that emerged from Haiti showed a landscape that looked like a war zone. Liogane, closest to the epicenter, was particularly devastated. 90% of buildings in the town were destroyed, with residents fleeing to sugarcane fields and mangrove swamps. Bodies lined the streets, covered by only blood-stained sheets. Outside one building alone, the corpses of 5 children and 3 adults lay piled together. 300,000 people were injured, many with crushed limbs and internal injuries. In a country where medical care was already limited, the destruction of hospitals meant that many of the wounded simply lay in the streets, waiting for help that never came. 1.5 million people became homeless overnight. People walked around with handkerchiefs over their face to ward off the stench of rotting flesh. Survivors described hearing screams from beneath the rubble for days after the earthquake. Rescue workers pulled bodies from collapsed buildings with garden spades and bare hands, with some victims found alive days later, only to die from their injuries because medical facilities no longer existed. The footage showed people desperately digging through concrete blocks, following the sound of voices, knowing that time was running out for anyone trapped below. Bodies were piling up faster than they could be collected, leading to mass graves and makeshift cremations. The morgue at the largest hospital could only estimate casualties by calculating the square footage of space where bodies had been placed. The footage from the weeks following the earthquake showed a country that had been fundamentally broken by just 35 seconds of shaking. Air India plane crash. Just 36 seconds after takeoff, Captain Sumit Sabharwal's voice crackled over the radio. Thrust not achieved. Falling. Mayday. 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 The Boeing 787 Dreamliner carrying 242 people had already begun its descent into the residential area of Meghaninagar, its landing gear still extended, but nose pitched high in a desperate attempt to maintain altitude. It wasn't working. The fuel control switches had somehow moved from run to cutoff position, starving both engines of fuel. One pilot asked the other, "Why did you cut off?" and received the response, "I did not do so." The plane crashed into the Beiji Medical College hostel complex at lunch hour. Students were seated at dining tables when the plane's wings clipped the 3rd, 4th, and 5th floors in one brutal swoop. The impact sent the tail section careening through the mess hall roof, while the left engine became embedded in the 4th floor of Building C. The temperature at the crash site reached extreme levels as aviation fuel mixed with human flesh to create an unbearable stench that lingered for hours. The bodies of those killed were found charred beyond recognition, with rescue workers forced to wear oxygen masks and wrap wet cloths around their hands to retrieve the remains. The buildings were totally destroyed, with massive debris including mangled metal and twisted beams scattered across the 9-acre site. The wreckage, including the distinctive tail fin, remained at the crash site for weeks while investigators sifted through the debris. Only one passenger survived from the 242 people aboard. It's still not understood exactly what happened. Brazilian woman films her own death. This footage comes from the phone of Williane Matais, sitting at the top of the stairs outside her small home in Santa de Cataguases, Brazil. The screen frames her 40-year-old neighbor, the man she calls Juliano, as he paces below in the courtyard area. What begins as documenting accusations of neighborhood gossip takes 22 seconds to become literal evidence of her own death. It's obvious that Juliano was accusing Williane of something unpleasant. Williane believes that recording this confrontation will vindicate her to her husband when he returns home. She's a mother of 3, standing on her own property, forced to film this clip to protect herself from the men in her lives. Actually, the argument stems from something so ordinary it's almost surreal. He believes she's been spreading lies about him through the neighborhood, the kind of small-town talk that festers in tight communities. She denies it in a firm but not aggressive way, unaware that her neighbor has already decided this conversation will end differently than she imagines. Over the course of the video, Juliano grows more agitated, his voice rising as he accuses her of gossiping about his business. She, however, doesn't take him seriously at all, thinking this is just a heated neighborly dispute. She holds her phone steady, believing she's creating evidence that will clear her name. But then, Juliano lifts his t-shirt, revealing the gun tucked into his waistband. Williane continues recording, perhaps not fully processing what she's seeing, or maybe frozen by the sudden escalation. 2 shots fire in rapid succession, both aimed at her face at point-blank range. The video ends abruptly, but not before capturing Juliano's final words, "Now you're going to hell, you demon." The phone falls. The screen goes dark, and this recording of her life becomes the recording of its ending. The video spreads rapidly online, viewed by thousands. She was rushed to Cataguases Hospital, but never regained consciousness, dying with her phone still containing the evidence of what happened. The man who shot her fled the scene, but was found hours later at his home, where police discovered the .38 caliber revolver and ammunition. Williane Matais had no way to know that her attempt to prove her innocence would instead become the most disturbing evidence of her neighbor's guilt. The footage would undeniably prove that she was killed by Juliano.